They say your wedding day should be the happiest day of your life. Mine was the day I realized my father never really saw me at all. Not for who I was, not for who I loved, only for how well I followed his rules. And on that day, in front of the people who mattered most to me, he made it very clear. I had failed him. My name is Daniel. I grew up in a world where being silent was mistaken for strength, and love had conditions wrapped around it like barbed wire. My father, Frank, served in the military for over 2 decades. He was respected, sharp, a man of discipline. But at home, he ruled with silence, the kind that filled a room even louder than yelling ever could. My whole life, I lived trying to earn his nod. Just one sentence of approval. One moment where he looked at me and said, "That's my son." I never got it. But I kept trying. Then I met Imani. I was volunteering at a community outreach center. She was the program coordinator, effortlessly organizing chaos with a clipboard in one hand and compassion in the other. She was confident, beautiful, and smart. She didn't flinch around power. She didn't shrink to make room for someone else's ego. And the first time she smiled at me, I felt something crack open. Not because she saw me as perfect, but because she saw me. Period. Imani didn't care that I was the son of a man with connections. She didn't care where I went to school, or what I drove, or what my last name meant in my old neighborhood. She cared about how I showed up, how I spoke to people when no one was watching. And for the first time, I felt free to just be me. No armor, no mask. We started dating quietly, not because we were ashamed, but because I wasn't ready to explain us to people who wouldn't even try to understand. I knew what would happen if I brought her home. Imani was black, and my father, well, he never had to say anything out loud for me to know where he stood. So, we stayed quiet. Our love was safe in the spaces we created. Late-night drives, lazy Sunday mornings, shared playlists, and inside jokes. She'd ask sometimes, "Do you think they'd like me?" And I'd lie. I'd say, "Yeah, of course." Even though I wasn't sure at all. Months passed, and then one day she told me she was pregnant. Her voice trembled just a little when she said it. Not because she was scared, but because she wasn't sure if I was. I wasn't. Not of her. Not of us. There was no fear. Only the overwhelming feeling that all of this was what life was supposed to feel like. We laughed and cried and talked about names and nursery colors, and when I got down on one knee with a ring I had saved for quietly, she said yes without hesitation. That moment was ours. But eventually reality knocked, and it sounded like my father's voice in the back of my head. So, I did what I always do. I stalled, told her I'd tell him tomorrow, next week, after the next ultrasound. She waited, patient but not passive, and one day she sat me down, looked me dead in the eye and said, "If they don't accept me now, they're not going to accept me later. So, what are you waiting for?" I had no answer. So I promised her I'd go, alone. Face him, man to man. When I walked into that house, my childhood home, everything felt smaller than I remembered. Even him. He was sitting in the den, sipping black coffee, surrounded by plaques and certificates and proof of the man he believed he was. I told him I was getting married. He didn't smile, just asked, "To who?" I told him her name. Then I told him she was black and that she was pregnant. The pause that followed was long, too long. Then he leaned back, looked at me like a stranger and said, "So this is how you destroy everything I built." I said I was happy, that I loved her, that we were building something real. He scoffed. "She trapped you," he said. "She's using you to climb, and you're too blind to see it." I kept my voice calm. I told him I made this choice, that it was mine, that I was proud of it. He stared at me for a moment, then stood up, walked to the door, and said, "Call it off, or I cut you off. Entirely." I didn't argue, didn't fight, I just left. And when I got back to Imani, when I told her everything, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She nodded once, then said, "Then we build without them." We started planning a wedding, a small one, intimate. Her family, my mom, who told me quietly with a trembling voice that she loved me no matter what, even if she couldn't say it in front of him. We rented a small venue. We picked colors. I watched her belly grow, watched her face glow, watched the woman I loved turn into a mother before our child was even born. And still, every night, I thought about him. About that empty chair, about how loud his absence would be on the day I said I do. Part of me still hoped that he'd show up quietly. Maybe not for me, but for the baby, for the chance to prove me wrong. But when he did show up, he didn't come for closure. He came for destruction. That's the thing about people like him. When they can't control you, they try to break you. And I learned the hard way that day, that some fathers would rather bury their sons emotionally than see them live freely outside their shadow. But what he didn't know, what he still doesn't know, is that everything he tried to destroy, it still stood. Because love doesn't die just because it's unloved by others. It grows anyway. And mine, it was just getting started. They say you can't plan for emotions. You can rent the perfect space, design the perfect menu, write the perfect vows, but when the day comes, feelings don't follow a script. They just rise. And that morning, mine were all over the place. Excitement, fear, pride, a strange quiet that sat between my shoulders like weight I couldn't shake. It wasn't nerves about marrying Imani. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. It was the silence from the empty seat that would be waiting for me at the front row. My father hadn't called. No text, no RSVP, just silence. I woke up at dawn, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the tux hanging by the door. I remembered being a kid and trying on one of his old military jackets, sleeves way too long, pretending I was someone important, someone respected. Back then, I thought I'd wear a uniform like his one day. Turns out I outgrew that dream, and the man attached to it. Imani was already up. She was with her sister, her cousins, her mom. I didn't get to see her that morning, just pictures being sent from the bridal suite. She looked beautiful. There was something about her that made every version of me, the scared boy, the unsure man, the first-time father, all feel like they had a place. When the guests started to arrive, I stood at the front, trying to remember how to breathe. My mom came in quietly, wearing soft blue, eyes scanning the room like she was looking for a ghost. She kissed my cheek, whispered, "He's not coming." I nodded, and then the music started. The room turned, and I saw her, Imani, my wife-to-be, walking, glowing, pregnant and proud, her hand resting over the small curve that held our child. The whole world went still. She didn't look scared. She looked steady, like a woman who had walked through fire just to stand in the light. And just like that, I remembered what this day was really about. Not him, not tradition, not shame, but love. When she reached me, I took her hand, kissed it gently, and whispered, "You're everything." She smiled and said, "We made it. We did our vows, exchanged rings, said I do in a room that clapped for us like we were the only two people in the world." For a while, everything was perfect. Until he walked in. Frank, my father, no warning, no announcement, just a door opening and a cold shadow stretching across the floor. He was in a dark suit, not the kind you wear to a wedding, the kind you wear to a funeral. He didn't look at me, didn't nod, just found a seat in the back row, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes burning a hole into my future. Imani didn't flinch. She stood taller. But me, I felt it. That deep, childlike fear I thought I'd buried. Like I was back in our living room being told I'd never be enough. Still, we smiled, took photos, cut the cake, danced, tried to hold on to joy. Then came the toasts. My best friend spoke. Imani's sister cried through hers. And just when we were ready to call it a night, my father stood up, uninvited, glass in hand. The room fell quiet. He cleared his throat, and everything after that is burned into me like a scar. He said, "Marriage is about honor, about family, about making choices that reflect where you come from." Then he looked at me hard and said, "Some choices dishonor everything that came before them." My son made one of those choices. He married a mistake, a woman who's already burdened him with a child before they even started. And he did it knowing it would shame this family. Gasps, chairs shifting, Imani's hand tightening around mine. But he wasn't done. "You think love means throwing away legacy? You think being a father starts by abandoning the one who raised you?" My mom whispered his name, "Frank, stop." But he kept going. "This isn't a toast, this is a truth. I came to watch the fall, not the celebration." And then he sat, like nothing had just shattered. Imani stood up, walked away, slow, silent, shaking. I followed, heart pounding. She didn't speak until we reached the hallway. Then she turned to me, tears held back by pure will, and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't want this for you." And that broke me. Because she still thought this was her fault. I took her hands and said, "No, I'm sorry I ever let him believe he still had power here. We held each other for a long time. Long enough to hear the music stop. Long enough to decide we were going back inside, because this was still our wedding, and no man, no father would steal it from us. When we returned, the room stood. Every single person on their feet, not for him, for us. I walked to the mic. I didn't plan a speech, but I didn't need to. I said, "Some people think love is earned by obedience. That legacy is more important than humanity. But I believe family is who shows up when it matters, not who tears you down when you finally stand up. This woman, this child we're expecting, this life, it's not a mistake. It's my beginning." I looked right at him. If I have to choose between building something real or living in the shadow of someone else's pride, then this is the easiest choice I've ever made. And I left the mic. We danced again, laughed again, took pictures again, and somehow found joy again. But something in me changed that night, because that was the last time I ever called him Dad. Weddings are supposed to end with memories. Ours ended with a line being drawn in the sand. After the last guests left and the candles had burned low, we sat together on the hotel bed in silence. Not a sad silence, just the kind that comes when the adrenaline fades and the reality sinks in. He actually did it. He came, and he tried to destroy us. Imani took off her earrings slowly, her reflection in the mirror strong, steady. But I knew what was behind that strength. She didn't want me to feel the weight of it, but I could see it in her eyes. She was tired. "I'm sorry," I said again, even though I'd already said it 10 times that night. She turned, walked over, and sat beside me. "You didn't fail me, Daniel. You chose me. And I will never forget that." I held her for a long time that night. Our baby moved for the first time, just a flutter. But somehow, it felt like a reminder. Life was still growing. The days after the wedding were hard. Photos from the wedding surfaced online, including someone's video of my father's outburst. The clip spread faster than I could imagine. Hundreds of strangers were weighing in. Some called him disgusting. Others questioned why I let him speak at all. But the damage wasn't just public. It was personal. 2 days after the wedding, I got an email from a company I had been interviewing with for months, a position I was practically guaranteed to land. They regretfully informed me that the opportunity was no longer available. No explanation. But I knew. My father had friends everywhere, old colleagues, former classmates, men who owed him favors, and one by one, doors started quietly closing. Then came the silence from certain relatives. People who had RSVP'd yes to the wedding, but never showed. No calls, no texts, just gone. I'd always known choosing Imani would come at a cost. I just didn't know how high the price would be. Imani started to notice too. Our evenings grew quieter. She'd ask how I was doing, and I'd lie, say fine when I felt like a man being erased by his own bloodline. At night, I'd lay awake wondering if I'd doomed us, if loving her had cost us the future I once dreamed of. But every time I looked at her, belly rising, hand on her stomach, talking softly to the baby like they already understood each other, I knew I couldn't regret a thing. Not her. Not this. Not us. Then came the message. A letter. Hand-delivered. No signature. No return address. Inside, a copy of a trust document. My father had officially removed me as the primary heir to the family estate. And not just removed, replaced. With my cousin. The same cousin who once got arrested for fraud and was bailed out by my father like it was nothing. There was a handwritten note paper clipped to the front. 6 words. "You chose your path. So did I." That was it. No apology. No attempt at understanding. Just a final slash across the page where my name used to be. I stared at that paper for a long time. Then I folded it once and dropped it in the trash. Imani didn't ask me about it. She just saw my face and brought me tea. We sat in silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. This time it was peaceful. Because that letter didn't break me. It freed me. Weeks passed. The nursery came together. Imani's laugh returned, and I found work again. Not in the field I trained for, but with people who didn't care about my last name. Just my work. Just my heart. Imani started a blog for young mothers navigating motherhood without family support. It blew up overnight. She turned her pain into purpose. That's who she is. Then one morning I got a call from my mom. She was quiet. I could hear the wind through her phone. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "your father watched your wedding video." I didn't ask how, didn't ask why. She paused. then said, he didn't say a word after, just sat there, then walked out. That was the last thing I ever heard about him. 3 months later, our daughter was born. She came early, but strong. Eyes like mine, smile like Imani, and the first time I held her, she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine and didn't let go. I whispered, "You will never feel like you don't belong." And I meant every word. We named her Grace, because even in the middle of everything ugly, there was still something beautiful. I didn't invite anyone from my side of the family to meet her. Not out of spite, out of peace. Peace we had earned, peace we protected. Imani and I built a life not on approval, but on love. Real love. Messy, painful, forgiving love. The kind that doesn't need permission to exist. The last time I drove by my father's house, it looked smaller, older, darker. And I realized it wasn't me who left anything behind. It was him. He lost a son, a daughter-in-law, a granddaughter he'll never meet. All because his pride screamed louder than his heart. And me? I gained a family I never have to prove myself to again. That's the thing about starting over. It doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. It means choosing where you go next and who's worth taking with you. Because the truth is, he humiliated me. He cut me off. He disowned me. But none of that stopped the future from arriving anyway. And when it did, it looked just like love. You think the worst part is the explosion, the yelling, the public disgrace, the final ugly moment that makes everyone gasp. But sometimes the most painful part comes after. In the quiet. In the days when no one calls. When people you thought loved you, or at least respected you, just disappear. After the wedding, that's what we got. Silence. Not just from my father, that much I expected, but from cousins, aunts, childhood friends, family friends who had known me since I was in diapers. People who'd RSVP'd yes with little emojis and warm messages, who had promised to be there. Gone. I'd scroll through my phone and see message threads that once buzzed with life. Now dead. No congrats. No I'm happy for you. Not even a hey saw the video, are you okay? Nothing. Some unfollowed Imani on social media, others muted or blocked us both. And when I say us, I mean her. I was still invited to some events, bachelor parties, football watch nights, but when I asked if she was welcome too, I got the same line, maybe just come solo this time, you know? Keep it easy. Keep it easy. Like my marriage, my child, my life was an inconvenience. Something to avoid talking about in polite company. Imani never said anything. She just pulled away quietly, stopped checking her phone for replies from my family, stopped asking me if they'd changed their minds. She knew the answer before I did. They had. Or maybe they never really saw her as someone they needed to accept in the first place. One day I got a message from my cousin Matt. Short, sharp. Heard about the will. Harsh. Still, choices have consequences. That was it. No concern. No warmth. Just a smug little echo of my father's pride. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen and thought, they all think I lost something. But the truth is, what I lost wasn't a trust fund. It wasn't access to a house or a family name or some imagined legacy. What I lost was the illusion that I ever truly belonged to them. But here's the thing about losing illusions. Once they're gone, you finally start building something real. And Imani, she was the realest thing I ever had. Even when she was hurting, she never made me choose. Never made me feel like I owed her for what I'd sacrificed. She made our little apartment feel like a kingdom, turned our tiny baby shower into a celebration of survival. And when she went into labor on a stormy Thursday night, she held my hand through every contraction like we were the only two people on earth. Grace was born at 2:03 a.m., 6 pounds, 9 ounces, a quiet cry, eyes wide open, like she already knew what she was walking into. I looked at her and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. A week later, I got a text from my father. Just one sentence. Send a photo of the baby. I stared at it for 5 minutes, then turned off my phone. He didn't ask how Imani was doing, didn't ask how we were coping, didn't say he was sorry. He just wanted a picture. Proof. A trophy, and I wasn't giving it to him. I never responded, and he never tried again. Imani and I fell into our new life like we were made for it. Late nights, bottles, rocking chairs, first giggles, first steps. We laughed more than we cried. And every time I thought about the family I'd left behind, I realized something. They were the ones missing out. Not me. They would never know the way Grace's nose wrinkles when she laughs. They would never hear the way she says dada, like it's the most important word in the world. They would never see the way Imani holds her, sings to her, teaches her love without conditions. And honestly, they didn't deserve to, because they never made space for her. And if there's one thing I've learned, you don't force your child to beg for love, not from strangers, and definitely not from people who share your blood, but not your heart. I wish I could say the pain vanished, that I stopped wondering what it would have been like to have my father in her life. But I'd be lying. There were days I stared at the door, hoping he'd knock, hoping he'd changed. But change doesn't come when pride wins. It comes when love matters more than ego. And for him, love never stood a chance. One morning, I was holding Grace by the window. Sunlight on her face, she was babbling nonsense words, laughing at birds, and I felt it again, that peace, that quiet certainty. My daughter will never feel the way I felt growing up. She'll never have to prove she belongs. She'll never sit in a room full of relatives and feel invisible. She'll never be the footnote in someone else's story. She will be the whole story. Because I'm writing it with her. And it's not built on silence, fear, or shame. It's built on something stronger. Love that doesn't have to be earned. Love that shows up. Love that stays. They say time heals everything. But time doesn't heal what you refuse to confront. It just builds layers over it, like paint over a cracked wall. From a distance it looks whole, but up close you can still see every fracture. And that's what it felt like, walking through life without my father. Not shattered, just unfinished. There were days when the absence felt louder than his voice ever did. Not because I missed the man he was, but because I missed the version of him I thought he could become. That version never showed up, but Grace did. Every day, with her wild hair and curious eyes and gummy smile, she gave me a reason not to look back. She was growing fast. Her first birthday came and went. No card, no gift, no message. Not that I expected one. But still, a part of me hoped that maybe somehow seeing her picture online, through a cousin's post or a family friend, might crack his pride just enough to say something. But silence has always been his favorite weapon. And now I had finally learned to stop bleeding from it. One afternoon I got a call from my mother. She rarely called. Texts, emails, sure. But calls meant something was wrong. She didn't waste time. "Your father's in the hospital," she said. "Stroke." There was a long pause. "He's awake, but he's not the same." She didn't ask me to come, didn't beg. She just gave me the facts and let the silence speak for itself. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel rage or grief, just nothing. I thanked her for letting me know, hung up, and sat there in the living room, Grace's toys scattered around my feet, Imani folding laundry on the couch. She looked up, waiting. I told her. She didn't react with anger or sympathy. She just said, "What do you want to do?" I didn't know. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to scream. I just wanted peace. A week later, I went, alone. Imani offered to come, but I told her this was something I had to walk through by myself. The hospital smelled like old memories, bleach, coffee, cheap soap. Everything sterile, like it was trying to clean away pain it couldn't reach. When I walked into the room, he was sitting up, pale, thin. Not the man who once stood with his arms crossed, judging my wedding from the shadows. He looked smaller. He turned when he saw me. Didn't smile, didn't frown, just blinked. His face twitched. The kind of twitch that comes from nerves no longer obeying orders. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. I stood there, frozen. Because for the first time in my life, my father had no words. The silence that used to control me was now his prison. I sat down, and for 10 minutes we said nothing. But for once, it wasn't cruel. It wasn't punishment. It was just quiet. I told him about Grace, told him she had his eyes, that she could already stack blocks like an architect and had a laugh that could break through any bad day. I told him I was happy, that Imani was everything he had feared and more. That we weren't surviving, we were thriving. I didn't cry, didn't shake. I just told the truth. Because he couldn't stop me anymore. And when I stood to leave, he tried to lift his hand, just an inch. And for a second, I thought he'd mouth sorry. But the words never came. They never had. And I realized I didn't need them anymore. That was the last time I saw him. He passed 6 weeks later. My mom called, told me gently, said she understood if I didn't want to come to the funeral. I asked her one question. Was he proud of me? At the end, she didn't answer directly, just said, he watched every video, every photo, and he never said a word, but he never looked away. Maybe that was his way. Too broken to say the words, too proud to admit regret. But that wasn't closure. Closure didn't come from his death. It came from the life I built without him. We didn't attend the funeral. We lit a candle at home, said a quiet prayer, and then we took Grace to the park. She ran across the grass, arms wide, hair in the wind, laughing like nothing could ever touch her. And I thought, this is what legacy really looks like. Not land, not money, not control, but freedom, love, joy that doesn't need permission to exist. A month later, we got a letter from the lawyer. A copy of the final will. No inheritance, no apology, no explanation. Just one thing tucked inside the envelope. A baby photo of me. On the back in his handwriting, don't let him forget where he came from. I stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into a drawer, because I knew exactly where I came from, and I knew where I was going. Grace is 3 now, and every night when I put her to bed, I whisper the same words. You belong. You matter. I choose you. Because the cycle ends here. No more silence, no more shame, no more love with conditions, just truth. And the truth is, my father humiliated me. He disinherited me. He broke me. But from the pieces I built something better. A life with no secrets, a family with no shame, a legacy built not on fear, but on love that stays. Always. Time moved on, not quickly, not all at once, but day by day. Soft and slow, like waves smoothing out a jagged shore. Grace was growing up fast, and so was I. There's something about becoming a father that rewrites you. You think you know what love is, until a tiny human falls asleep on your chest, trusting you with her whole world. And suddenly, nothing you lost even matters anymore. Not the money, not the family name, not the people who walked away when you needed them most. Because what you've built, this small, messy, beautiful thing, feels more valuable than anything you left behind. Imani and I were still in the same apartment, still figuring things out. We weren't rich, but we were full. We had what mattered. I was working a steady job with a startup, one that saw me as more than a last name. Imani's blog had turned into a business. She was speaking at events, writing, lifting up other women like her. Women who had been told they were too much to love, too loud, too complicated, too black, too strong. She turned her pain into purpose, not for revenge, but for legacy. And I watched her in awe every single day. Sometimes I still asked myself, how did I get this lucky? And then I'd remember, I chose this, even when it cost me everything else, and I'd choose it again. Grace had just turned 4 when everything started to shift. She came home from daycare one afternoon holding a drawing. It was us, a stick figure family. But there was a question mark above one figure holding a square briefcase. What's this? I asked. That's you, she said proudly. And the question mark? She shrugged. I don't know what you do, but you always leave. She said it so innocently, but it hit me. Hard. I was providing. I was present. But maybe I wasn't with her enough. Not really. And I realized I wanted more than survival. I wanted to be there. Not just financially, but fully. That night after she went to bed, Imani and I sat on the couch in silence for a while. Then she said she's growing fast. And I nodded. We knew something needed to change. Not because we were unhappy, but because we were coasting. And coasting wasn't why we fought so hard to get here. That same week, something strange happened. I got a call from my father's attorney. Not the same one from before. A new one. He said there had been a mistake in the estate records. Apparently, my father had left behind a safety deposit box, one that hadn't been logged in the original will because it was under a private trust. And inside that box was a letter, addressed to me. I didn't want it, but curiosity has a funny way of sneaking in. So I went. It was a small office downtown. The lawyer didn't ask questions, just handed me the envelope. It was thick, heavy, yellowed around the edges like it had been sealed for years. On the front, to my son, if you ever care to know. I opened it. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father's handwriting stretched across more than just a signature. It was shaky, but clear. There were no apologies, no begging, just a story about his childhood, about losing his father at a young age, about being raised in silence, with discipline so sharp it felt like punishment. He wrote about how he'd tried to make me strong, not knowing the difference between strength and fear. And then, near the end of the letter, he wrote something I didn't expect. I loved you. I just didn't know how to show it without control. I sat there reading it over and over, my hands shaking. He was still wrong. Love without safety isn't love. Control isn't care. But for the first time, I saw him as a man. Not a monster, not a ghost, just a man. Flawed, damaged, scared. And maybe that didn't make everything okay. But it made something shift. I took the letter home, showed Imani, she read it quietly, then handed it back and said, "You're not him." And that was the closure I didn't know I needed. Not forgiveness, just freedom from the need to fix what never belonged to me. We started dreaming bigger after that. Not because we had more money, but because we had more clarity. I left my job 6 months later, started something of my own. A consulting company that helped other small businesses thrive without chasing corporate approval. Imani expanded her work, she hired a team, launched a podcast. We weren't building for status. We were building so Grace would never question what it looked like to belong. And slowly, the life we created started to feel like a real legacy. Not the kind passed down in a will, but the kind built brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. And it was all ours. Grace was 5 the day she asked the question. We were sitting on the living room floor building a crooked Lego castle. She placed a block on top, then looked up and asked casually, "Daddy, do you have a daddy?" It caught me off guard. I nodded slowly. "I did. He's not here anymore." She blinked. "Was he nice?" I hesitated. Imani was folding clothes in the next room. She paused, listening. I knew my answer mattered, so I told her the truth, as gently as I could. He was strong, but not always kind. Grace tilted her head. "Like a mean robot?" I laughed softly. "Maybe. He didn't know how to show love the way Mommy and I do." She nodded like she understood more than a 5-year-old should. Then she added, "But you show love really good." I don't think she knew what she gave me in that moment, because all the weight I had carried, the rejection, the disinheritance, the shame, it didn't disappear. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. Not when I realized that I had broken the cycle. Imani and I had started looking for a house, something simple, just ours. We weren't chasing square footage or gated communities. We wanted a yard Grace could run around in, a kitchen big enough for burnt pancakes and Sunday dance parties. One day, after weeks of searching, our agent showed us a place just outside the city. It wasn't perfect. The porch was chipped. The roof needed patching. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it, like I could finally breathe. Imani stood by the window, sunlight pouring onto her skin like something sacred. She looked at me and smiled. "This is it, isn't it?" And it was. We moved in a month later. Used furniture, fresh paint, boxes full of memories. It didn't look like much to anyone else, but to us, it was a castle. We planted a tree in the backyard, a little one, crooked like Grace's Lego tower. She named it Sunshine. She said it was our forever tree. I think she was right. A few weeks after we moved in, we got a package, no return label. Inside, a simple wooden box, no markings, no note. Imani raised an eyebrow. I opened it carefully. Inside was an old pocket watch. I recognized it instantly. My grandfather's. The same one I used to sneak from my father's drawer as a kid. The one he told me I'd never be ready to carry. There was no explanation, but I knew what it meant. Somewhere before he passed, my father must have set this aside. Not for status, not for money. Just something small, a symbol, a memory, a maybe. I showed it to Grace. She turned it over in her little hands and said, "Is this treasure?" I smiled. "Something like that." She asked if she could keep it. I told her yes. Not because she needed it, but because I wanted her to know. Even when the world tries to steal your story, you get to decide what part you carry forward. Imani framed the old letter from the safety deposit box. Not to glorify it, but to remind us that healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about remembering that we survived it, that we rebuilt, that we chose something better. I still think about him sometimes. Not with hatred, not even with sorrow, just with distance. Like a place I once lived in. Cold, strict, windowless, but no longer mine. And now, when I see Grace run barefoot through the yard, sunlight on her face. When I hear Imani humming in the kitchen, laughing at a joke only she heard. When I close the front door and smell dinner cooking while the TV plays cartoons in the background, I realize something. This is the legacy. Not what's written in a will, not what's passed through bloodlines or titles. It's what you fight for, what you protect, what you love loud enough that the silence can never take root again. Years passed. Grace grew taller, louder, funnier. She lost her front teeth, cried over scraped knees, and insisted on sleeping with 3 stuffed animals, all of which had names and backstories. She was magic. Not because she was perfect, but because she was free. She danced in grocery aisles, she sang in the car. She asked hard questions and expected real answers. She didn't walk on eggshells. She didn't shrink to make space for anyone's ego. And every time I watched her, I saw the child I could have been, if I had ever felt that safe. Imani and I celebrated our 8th anniversary quietly. No big dinner, no expensive gift, just us, curled up on the couch after Grace went to bed, watching a movie we'd already seen 10 times. That's the thing about love when it lasts. It stops needing fireworks to prove it exists. It just settles into your bones like warmth you forgot you needed. One evening, I was going through old boxes in the attic. Stuff we'd moved from apartment to apartment but never really unpacked. At the bottom of one box, I found a file folder. Inside, a photo from our wedding. One of the few where my father was visible in the background, arms folded, standing alone. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I missed him, but because I finally understood something. He wasn't angry that I married Imani. Not really. He was angry that I stopped needing his approval to be whole, that I walked away, that I loved loudly, that I raised a daughter he'd never get to name or shape. He lost power, and for people like him, that feels like death. But what he didn't realize is that love doesn't need power to grow. It just needs presence. And presence, that's something he never gave me. Grace started school that fall. I walked her in on the first day, hand in hand. She looked up at me and said, "You're not gonna leave after I go inside, right?" I smiled. "Not until you say I can." She nodded, then ran into the classroom like she owned the place. I watched her through the glass for a few minutes, and that was the first time I cried for real in years. Not out of grief, but out of relief. Because I knew, for the first time in generations, this cycle was truly broken. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail, from my father's attorney again. I thought everything had been settled, but this time, it wasn't about property or money. It was a message passed down from a friend, one of the few people who had stayed in touch with him in his final months. Inside the envelope was a journal, leather-bound, worn at the edges, no title, no note, just pages, filled with his handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I waited 3 days. When I finally did, I was surprised. It wasn't about me, not directly. It was about him, his thoughts, his fears, his regrets. He wrote about his own father, a man even colder than him. A man who raised him through shame and silence, who never once told him, "I'm proud of you." I read entries where he questioned himself, where he confessed to moments of doubt, where he admitted he didn't know how to be anything other than hard because softness was never modeled for him. And in the final pages, one sentence stood out. "My son taught me what love looks like, but I learned too late." I closed the journal, and for the first time since the wedding, I let myself grieve, not for what I lost, but for what he never had the courage to become. He missed it, all of it. Grace's birth, Imani's laughter, our first home, the family dinners, the messy mornings, the bedtime stories. He missed the legacy he could have helped shape, not by controlling it, but by witnessing it. That night, Imani found me on the porch, the journal on my lap. She didn't ask what it said. She just sat beside me and said, "You okay?" And I was. For the first time, I really was. Because I had finally made peace with the fact that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means finally understanding the story, so you can stop carrying it. Grace is 6 now. She tells everyone she wants to be an astronaut and a baker and a mommy and a superhero. And honestly, I believe her. Because no one ever told her she couldn't. And that's the legacy. Not the pain, not the name, not the inheritance, but the freedom to be fully, wildly, unapologetically herself. I tuck her in every night with the same words. You are enough. You are loved. You are free. Because she is. Because we are. Because even though my story started with humiliation and rejection and silence, it ends here. In this home, with this family, with love that didn't ask permission. This story could have ended in bitterness, and for a long time, I thought maybe it would. You don't just walk away from the weight of a father's rejection, or the sting of being called a disgrace for loving someone different, or the silence that follows when the people who raised you decide you no longer fit the image they built. But somehow, here I am, still standing, still soft, still choosing love over legacy. And if you're still watching, maybe this story is yours too. Maybe you felt it. That cold shoulder, that invisible line between acceptable and too much. The quiet judgment hidden behind smiles and small talk. Maybe you dared to love someone your family didn't approve of. Maybe you followed a dream they called foolish. Maybe you spoke up when silence was as expected, and they made you pay for it. If that's you, I want you to hear this. You are not a disgrace. You are not broken. You are not less. You are not the mistake they made you believe you were. Sometimes breaking away is the bravest thing you'll ever do. It doesn't always come with applause. It rarely comes with a clean goodbye. But it opens the door to something better. To peace. To purpose. To people who don't need you to shrink to feel safe. Imani once told me something years ago, when we were still rebuilding. They will either learn to love the truth of you, or they will lose access to you. And she was right. You don't owe your presence to people who only love the version of you that stays silent. You don't owe comfort to those who confuse control with care. You owe yourself freedom. I wish my father had lived long enough to see all of it. Grace's first piano recital, Imani being honored for her work, our second child due in just a few months. But life doesn't wait for pride to catch up, and sometimes the apology never comes. That's okay, because healing was never about them. It was about reclaiming the parts of yourself you were told were unworthy. It was about standing up in a room full of people who expected you to crumble, and smiling anyway. If you're still listening, here's what I want you to take with you. You don't have to be what they said you'd be. You don't have to carry shame that was never yours. You don't have to inherit silence. You don't have to pass down pain. You get to choose. You get to build something different. Something kinder, something louder, something whole. And if no one ever told you this before, let me be the first. You are worthy. You are enough. You are not the family disgrace. You are the new beginning. I was disinherited. I was humiliated, but I was never defeated, because the life I have now, the family I built, the love that surrounds me, that's the real inheritance. That's the proof. That's the ending. And it's only the beginning. This story was inspired by true events. And I'm just getting started with this channel, built from the ground up. So if you found even a piece of yourself in this story, if it made you feel seen or reminded you that you're not alone, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Not for the numbers, but so we can keep telling stories that matter, stories that heal, stories that remind us all, even when they count you out, you still matter. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if no one else tells you today, you belong.